essential unit of life. Only if we have cells, then we have life. So all living organisms are made up of cells. So when we start developing our life, first we are all similar. We are formed as a single cell in our mother's womb. We all form as a single cell first in a mother's womb. Later the embryo divides and multiplies into multiple cells, and then organs start forming. But at the starting of the life, everybody is like a single cell only. So in unicellular organisms like amoeba, there is a single cell. This is unicellular, example of a unicellular organism. So in amoeba, this single cell carries out all the functions of the body like respiration, transportation, hormones, excretion and everything. Whereas compared to amoeba, whereas plants, animals and human beings are multicellular. Only unicellular organism is amoeba. And plants, animals and human beings are multicellular organisms. They have millions of cells in their body. So these cells are specialized to carry out different functions of the body. A group of cells are specialized in a specific area to carry out one specific function. So human beings are made up of muscle cells, nerve cells and blood. So muscle cells. Muscle cells are responsible for contraction and relaxation and movement of your body. When you talk about movement of the body, you move your hand, definitely the muscles are helping. You see the muscles of the actors, right? Hrithik Roshan and many actors, they develop biceps and triceps. All these are because of the muscle cells. Then coming to the nerve cells. Nerve cells carry out a special function. They transport messages from the brain to the different organs of the body. Suppose if you touch any hot object or any extreme cold object, that is a stimulus. So immediately the nerve cells transport the message to the brain. So immediately brain sends signals back to your hand, but remove your hand back. So immediately when you touch an extreme hot or extreme cold object, you immediately remove your hand back. That is because of the presence of nerve cells. They carry messages to the brain. So next comes blood. Blood is also a type of connective tissue. What is the function of blood? It carries food, transport food to the body, transport hormones, purification of blood and other things. Then human beings, as I told you, muscle cells, nerve cells and blood carries out all these functions. All these are made up of millions of cells. Coming to the plants. Plants have vascular tissues. They carry out all the functions like transport of food, transport of water, photosynthesis activity and other things. So a particular function is carried out by a cluster of cells at one specific place. So one specific function is carried out by one group of cells at only one place. So this cluster of cells is called a tissue. So tissues have the highest efficiency of function. They can do all the functions of the body. So what is the definition of a tissue? Group of cells similar in structure or work together to achieve a function is called tissue. Remember, a group of cells similar in structure is size, shape, or work together to achieve a particular function. Suppose movement or transportation of food, hormones or excretion. So a group of cells do that. To achieve that function is called a tissue. Then have you ever thought, are plants and animals tissues similar? Do they work in the same way? No, right? Because plants, talking about plants are their growth is not completely lifelong. The growth is limited to a certain period, and the regions of the growth are also limited, and there is non-uniform growth in the plants. But whereas in animals the growth is uniform, there are millions of cells to support specific function. So based on the dividing capacity of the tissues, they are classified into many ways. So animals and plant tissues are different. Animal tissues are uniform. They are specialized to carry specific function. Whereas plant tissues, their growth is limited only and they are non-dividing. Whereas the animal tissues are dividing. So in the later discussion of this chapter, you will know the difference between the plant and animal tissue. So based on the dividing capacity, the tissues are divided into many types. Let's go deep into the classification of tissues now. Okay. Now we are going to deal about the classification of tissues. So we came to know the animal and plant tissues same. No, the pattern of growth is different. They grow, sometimes plants do not grow throughout their life, whereas animals they grow throughout their life sometimes. There is difference in the pattern of growth. Plants are not movable, they are always fixed at one place, whereas animal they have locomotion. So there is a lot of difference between the pattern of growth between animals and plants. Now coming to the classification of tissues. So based on the dividing capacity of the cells, they are of two types, meristematic and permanent. Meristematic means dividing, meristem means division. So meristematic tissues are of three types. Then again, depending on the location where they are located in the plants, they are of three types, apical, intercalary and lateral meristem. So based on the dividing capacity, tissues are of two types, plant tissues. Here we are dealing only about the plant tissues, meristematic tissue and permanent tissue. Meristematic tissue, again on the depending on the location where they are present in the plant, they are apical, intercalary and lateral meristems. Then permanent tissue, simple permanent and complex permanent tissue. As they are sounding complex permanent doesn't mean they are complex or difficult to understand, they are easy. So permanent tissue is of two types, simple permanent and complex permanent. In simple permanent again you have three types depending on the structure of the cell, parenchyma, collenchyma and sclerenchyma. The examples of complex tissues are xylem, phloem and epidermal cells. So now we have came to know the basic classification of the plant tissues. Now hereafter we shall deal in detail about the meristematic tissues and the permanent tissues. So we are talking about the plant tissues. The first type of plant tissue is meristematic tissue. Right? As I told you earlier, meristematic tissue means dividing tissue. So what are meristematic tissues? They are small bunches of densely packed cells. They keep on dividing. They have an urge for division. They have nucleus, but they do not have vacuole. What is the function of vacuole? Storage of water and support. Here they do not need that, right? They do not need storage of water and support for the meristematic tissue. That's why they have nucleus and dense cytoplasm but have no vacuole. So remember this. Meristematic tissue doesn't have vacuole and they are small bunches of densely packed cells which keep on dividing. And they are tireless, fearless and ever growing and the most active bunch of cells. They always keep on dividing. They have a huge urge for division. Then what are the types of meristematic tissues? Depending on the location of the plant where they are located, they are classified into apical, intercalary and lateral. So where is apical meristem? Apical meristem is located in the tips of the shoots and roots, and roots meristem forms root cap. So they are located in the tips of the plant or on the roots of the plant. So they are responsible for vertical growth either upwards or either downwards. When they go down into the soil, they make their hands dirty, right? They touch the soil. So what happens? They develop something called root cap over it. So apical meristem is present in the tips or in the roots. When they go into the roots and make their hands dirty, they develop something called root cap over it. Then it is responsible for primary growth, that is vertical growth, either upwards or downwards. So that is about apical meristem. It is a primary meristem. Then coming to the intercalary meristem, it is present in the base of the leaves and internodes of the leaves. Suppose taking an example of the bamboo plant. Bamboo plant is an ever-growing plant. It always increases in length. So on the base of the leaves or the twigs, suppose the base of the leaves and the nodes, internodes, it is present. Suppose taking the example of a cow and a grass. So always there is a grass on the ground. The cows keep eating the grass. So what happens if the grass doesn't go again? It will be difficult for survival, both for the cow and the plants also. Plants will die if they don't grow again after grazing. Then sometimes in our lawns we cut the grass equal length. What happens if the grass doesn't grow again? The plant will die. So the intercalary meristem is the meristematic tissue that helps in regrowth always. So in the natural process where herbivores feed on the grass, they keep regrowing, and in the process of where we cut the lawn for grass, there also it keeps regrowing. So intercalary meristem is the only meristem that is responsible for growth of the leaves, stems and everything. The example can be bamboo plant. Then coming to the lateral meristem. Lateral meristem is responsible for secondary growth. It increases the width or girth of the bark. Here I am talking about bark means not the noun bark which dog does, bow bow bark. I am talking about the verb bark. This is called the bark of the tree. It increases in width or girth. For the lateral meristem is responsible, and this is also called the secondary growth of the plant. So it is the horizontal growth. It is growing in a straight line horizontally. Apical meristem, it is present in the tips of the stems and roots. It is responsible for vertical growth. Intercalary meristem, present in the base of the leaves. It is responsible for regrowth of the plants or leaves. Lateral meristem responsible for secondary growth, increases the girth or width of the plant in the form of bark. So meristematic is an ever dividing tissue, very active, dense cytoplasm, has nucleus but lacks vacuole. It is ever growing. So these meristematic tissue, after growing to some time, they stop dividing and get specialized to form a specific function. They take a permanent size and shape and they develop to form a specific tissue and they perform a specific function. After they stop dividing, they specialize. This process of specializing and taking up a permanent shape structure is called differentiation. So meristematic tissues are undifferentiated. Later they differentiate and form a permanent tissue. Take up a specific shape or function and form a permanent tissue. Now we shall next deal about the permanent tissues. So the second thing in the plant tissues are permanent tissues. And then as I told you, permanent tissues are of two types, simple permanent tissue and complex permanent tissue. Now here we will be dealing with only simple permanent tissue. So simple permanent tissue, the cells of the meristematic tissue stop their ability to divide and differentiate to form multiple cells. They take up a specific shape, size and function and they perform a specific function. So this process is called differentiation. The cells of the meristematic tissue differentiate to form different forms of permanent tissue. And then as you know, there is no vacuole in the meristematic tissue, but there is vacuole here in the permanent tissue. Vacuole grows and fills 90% of the cell volume here. So differentiation occurs, cells of the meristematic tissue differentiate to form different forms of the permanent tissue. There is vacuole which fills 90% of the cell volume. Then permanent tissue, simple permanent tissue is of three types: parenchyma, collenchyma and sclerenchyma. Sometimes they may sound as Greek, Latin and Spanish to you. But before you feel it like Greek, Latin and Spanish, let me explain you what is it. So parenchyma. Parenchyma is basically a simple layer of cells. So these layers of cells are spherical in shape. But as you see from the up, they look like spherical. But you see a transverse section, they are side by side, they get packed and they get flattened at the point of contact. And there is large intercellular space between them. So parenchyma are usually spherical cells. Later, they get packed side by side and get flattened at the point of contact. So they have intercellular spaces in them. So what is the function of this parenchyma cells? They give support to the plants and they help in storage of the food. So parenchyma cells function is support of the plants, provide support to the plants and helps in storage of the food. And again, there is a hybrid variety of parenchyma cells. Suppose if you add chloroplast to these parenchyma cells, they attain green color and can also make food. So then they are called as chlorenchyma cells. Suppose if you add chloroplast, then you give green color to the cell. Then they will be able to perform photosynthetic activity and store food. Then they will be called chlorenchyma cells. Then there is one more variety called parenchyma cells. Suppose in those intercellular spaces air is filled, then they will give them a capacity to float. Suppose an example, water lily, lotus, they float on the plants. These parenchyma cells provide buoyancy or water floating capacity to the cells. So one more hybrid variety of parenchyma is parenchyma. They have air-filled cavities between the parenchyma cells, which provide them the water holding capacity and buoyancy and the capacity to float on the water. So the example of that is water lily or lotus. Then coming to collenchyma. Collenchyma is made up of collenchyma cells. They are flat, thick, uneven and strong and they have no intercellular spaces between them. Whereas in parenchyma we have very much intercellular space. In collenchyma, flat, thick, uneven and strong cells with no intercellular spaces between them. What is the function of collenchyma? They provide flexibility of the plants. Suppose due to heavy wind sometimes plants bend, but they do not die or they do not fall onto the ground. So that is with the help of collenchyma. They are found in leaf stalks. The part below the leaves is called leaf stalks. So parenchyma and collenchyma together form living cells of the simple permanent tissue. Then the last simple permanent tissue is sclerenchyma. So sclerenchyma consists of sclerenchymatous tissues. Remember, this is dead cells. These cells are dead, but they are very strong even though they are dead. They have thick secondary walls. They are embedded with a thick cement-like material between the cells. Those cement-like material gives them the hardness and provides mechanical support. So this pigment like cement, I told you there is a pigment like cement between the cells with no intercellular spaces. That pigment is called lignin. The material lignin acts as a cement and it is filled between the cells, which provides the hardness. They are dead cells. They are very tough and strong. So where can these be found? Husk of the coconut. You know the coconut shell is very hard. Then hard covering of the nuts like walnuts, for example, chestnuts. All those hard covering of the nuts is made up of sclerenchyma. Then veins of the leaves. Veins of the leaves are also strong. Coconut leaves, the veins are very strong. So all these are made up of sclerenchyma. Sclerenchyma is a dead cell. Now let's move to the complex permanent tissue.